Welcome, everyone. Welcome to day one fully of Labour Party conference. You are all the very organised early birds who managed to get your morning coffee, get in and find this beautiful lounge in time for this event. So thank you all for joining us for this panel on gambling reform entitled Overpermitted, Undertaxed, What Next for Gambling Reform. There are quite a few people on the panel and hopefully we might be joined by some more later as well. But I'm delighted to introduce Baroness Twycross, who is the Gambling Minister. Theo Bertram from the Social Market Foundation, who is hosting, presenting this event. You're on the banners anyway. Henry Pakes from the IPPR, that's also done a lot of work on this, and Alex Ballinger, the MP, who managed to organise 101 MPs to write a letter to the Chancellor, which we'll be hearing a bit more about later. And we might also get some comments and representatives from some regional leaders as we go on. We're going to do opening statements of 2 to 3 minutes on the current landscape, what the government was trying to do, what the government perhaps could do if it thought a bit more creatively, and how gambling tax reform fits into wider government priorities such as child poverty and the two-child benefit cap, which is probably, I think, one of the big themes of this Labour Party conference. We'll have a bit of a discussion and then I'll hand over to questions as soon as I can so we can get a really good discussion going. So I thought I would start with the Minister, Baroness Twycross, to give us an overview of where we are.
Does that work? Yeah. Great. Okay. I've proved that I can turn the microphone on, which is a good start. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I'm delighted to be here. The Social Market Foundation event I did last year was the first time I'd spoken in public as a gambling minister. So I think last year I was very much in listening mode, and looking around the room I can see many people I've spoken to throughout the year. So I'm really grateful to everyone who's taken the time to meet me, to talk with me, to disagree with me on some occasions about your views on our priorities as a Labour government for gambling reform. I was particularly grateful to hear from those of you who shared your stories and heartbreak about the very real impact of harmful gambling on your lives and your loved ones. I'm really pleased, and I think a couple of people spoke to me about this at the start. I was really pleased that last week Steve Reed announced that measures on the types of businesses that can be allowed in communities will be taken forward through MHCLG policies. I know this is something that a lot of people have campaigned on, and we do believe that it should be down to local communities how their high streets are shaped, what type of businesses they have. From a DCMS perspective, this is a really welcome confirmation of direction of travel. I did want to go through some of the measures we've introduced since I was here last year, though, and just talk very briefly about my priorities as Gambling Minister. Government policy is, as you'll be aware, based on our very firm manifesto commitment to tackle gambling harm, but also to support a growing regulated gambling industry. There remain many people who do gamble without experiencing harm, and there's many people who are employed by the sector, including trade union members. The National Lottery's raised over £50 billion over the past 30 years for good causes. And as part of the government commitment to tackle gambling harm and our commitment to take forward measures in the Conservatives' government white paper, we have, among other things, introduced a statutory levy on licensed gambling operators, which will raise about £100 million a year for research, prevention and treatment to reduce gambling-related harms across Great Britain. We've introduced stake limits for online stakes. These are set at £2 a spin for 18 to 24-year-olds and £5 per spin for adults aged 25 and over. Financial risk checks were introduced in August last year, which are triggered when a customer has a net deposit of more than £150 a month, and that's being evaluated currently. And as you may be aware, the Gambling Commission is piloting enhanced financial risk assessments for the highest spending online accounts. So I've just got a couple more comments, if that's okay for me to go through. Where it hasn't been possible to deal with issues through secondary legislation, and in the absence of primary legislation, I have been pushing for change by operators themselves. So I have set the sector the challenge of looking at the cumulative impact of advertising, which is one of the biggest issues raised with me, as well as looking at independent complaints mechanism or ombudsman. I've engaged with BACTA on what more they can do with their members to increase protections of customers, and I've asked big prize draw sector to work up a voluntary code as prize draws with free prize entries are not currently regulated as gambling because of the free prize route. And I've also spoken to representative bodies within sports about how they can tighten up policies around sponsorship. Clearly, over coming months, the HMT consultation, which and tax generally, which I presume will be covered by other speakers, will continue to be a big issue. And I'm sure many of you have submitted evidence to the HMT consultation, and I look forward to hearing the debate this morning. Thank you.
Thank you for kicking us off with that. Theo, I wondered if, as the sponsor of this, the Social Market Foundation has done a lot of work in this area. Could you give us an overview of what you found out?
Yeah, and I think there's two things that we've been working on at the SMF. The first, very positively welcome what the government's doing on adult gaming centres. This is an area where we've been working with Brent Council. Adult gaming centres are on your high streets. They may look like a bookie, but what they've got inside is a group of people sitting in front of large machines, gambling through online, a slot machine in effect. And these adult gaming centres have grown enormously in recent years. And in theory, the council has some ability to say no to the highly dense increase of these AGCs. But in practice, what happens is the people behind the AGCs take it to the courts, and the council simply can't compete with them once you get into that process. And so it's very welcome that the government has recognised that we've got this problem. And it is, if you're an MP, just go to the poorest part of your constituency. That's where the adult gaming centres will be. And one of the things is the local councils can't just walk in. They have to give notice, so they can't see what they're actually like. But if you're an MP, you can just walk in and you can see for yourself. And they're sort of portrayed as, these are like bingo, this is a really social event. But if you go in, you'll see there's a person sat in front of a screen with all distraction trying to remove from them just so they can continue gambling. So you can go in and you can talk to the staff and ask them about how long are people spending at those machines and what's the experience. And I encourage you to do that. And the more that you do that, the more you can see why communities themselves in these areas are worried about the proliferation of those gambling centres. And we're not calling for them to be banned. The gambling lobby will say we're anti-gambling. We're not anti-gambling, but we think that that proliferation has gone too far, and councils and communities have lost the ability to say that's enough. And so it's good that the government are making these changes so that councils and communities have that right again. The second area where we're pushing for change is on gambling tax. In particular, we're focused on remote gaming duty. So we've seen a huge increase since the pandemic of people gambling on their phones and online. And at the moment, that is actually taxed lower than if you go and have a bet at the bookies on a racecourse. And there's a big difference between having a bet at the bookies on a racecourse and gambling on your phone. One is much more harm. So gambling on your phone, all of the studies, all of our online slot, remote gaming, we know that that's a much more likely to lead to problem gambling compared to a one-off bet on a sporting event. We also know that horse racing is sort of part of the lifeblood, the culture of the UK, also employs lots of people. So we don't want to destroy horse racing, and it's important that the proposals that we've set out are designed to separate and protect horse racing. So while we would increase remote gaming duty to 50%, which is below what other parts of the world have as the remote gaming duty, we would actually increase the protections for horse racing, and doubling the levy that goes to horse racing and exempting smaller operators to protect horse racing, smaller bookies as well. So our target is really these huge companies that make enormous profits, and to make sure that we focus on that part where they're making the most money that causes the most harm with the least number of people employed exactly in that area. We think that's what the tax is for, and obviously, that tax could be used for some very good things, not least making a dent in child poverty. So that's what we've been working on. We're working with IPPR and Alex as well.
Thank you. And Henry, from the IPPR, would you like to pick up on both of those themes, the harm reduction potential, and also the revenue side of it. The IPPR has done a lot of work on how much potentially this could raise and what it could potentially be spent on.
Thank you very much. So, hi everyone. So, first of all, obviously the government has been looking at inherited ideas from the previous government around kind of unifying the tax rate for gambling taxes, obviously consulting on that, bringing everything into line into a single tax rate. Just to say, first of all, that, we think that's kind of the wrong way to go. If some gambling is more harmful, then it makes sense for it to be taxed at a higher rate. That's kind of how it works for other duties, alcohol duties, etc. So more harm, more tax is a good sort of fundamental principle. Yes, it would be nice and simple to have one rate, but that wouldn't necessarily make it great policy. So, we kind of would say, let's look at the harms and tax the things that are higher harm at a higher rate. So, as has already been sort of discussed, our proposals build on the SMF's ones around increasing taxes on gambling. Specifically, I came into this because I have a social security background. I'm very interested in child poverty, reducing child poverty, and the price tag for the removal of the two-child limit and benefit cap is around £3 billion. So Theo, your proposals get us to £2 billion, and we're sort of like, okay, well, where would you go next with this to get to that £3 billion? Basically our arguments are around the machine gaming duty. So you've already kind of talked about what goes on in adult entertainment centres, as they're called. And effectively what we're saying is look, like, you've got this sort of activity going on online. It is the sort of offline equivalent, but actually very similar in terms of the experience of doing that gambling, but doing it on the high street. And we think that raising those levies on machine games duty in line with your proposals on remote gaming duty would get us to that £3 billion figure. And just to say, of course, we're not, obviously there is the harm reduction aspect of this, but the revenue is also absolutely key. I think it is important to think about where this money could go. Removing the two-child limit is the cheapest way to lift 500,000 children out of poverty, improve the lives of 1.6 million children. This is not money that goes into a black hole. This is money that goes into people's pockets, gets spent and recirculated in communities, and that is a huge social benefit that we would see. At the moment you've got 1 in 4 larger families experiencing food insecurity. It is unacceptable. The fiscal situation is obviously very tight, and we do think there is money on the table here to potentially remove that cap within current fiscal constraints. I could go on, but is that helpful? Yeah?
I'll take this one back. Alex, tell everyone about your letter.
Hello. I think they all work. We've got an excellent organisation that's delivered this debate. But before I go on to that, Rachel, just to say thank you to the Minister and thank you for the really positive developments we've seen on the white paper. I think the work that's happening around prevention, treatment and research, building on from the last government, is really welcome, and that's going to make a big difference to the kind of people that MPs like me are interested in helping, the people that are suffering from gambling harms. I'll also say, just to reinforce what colleagues have said, the nature of gambling has changed dramatically. Now, I used to be in the Royal Marines back in the day, 15, 20 years ago. There was a gambling problem in the military. So people got into a lot of debt. There was a lot of slot machines on the bases. Working with the bookies was a big problem, and lots of young lads would develop a lot of debt and a lot of bad habits they would take into later life. But the way that the industry has changed over the last 10 years, the rise in online gaming, the rise in these adult gaming centres, has meant that now gambling in the armed forces is probably the biggest problem that young servicemen are facing, compared to any of these other sort of addictions you might think of. So in my day that was alcohol. Young guys used to go out, they drink too much, they would fight, they get in trouble. I'm talking to my colleagues now. People are spending time in their bunks, playing these online games, wasting all of their salaries, getting into debt, getting into family difficulties, and often, in the worst cases, committing suicide. And these are things that we need to take really seriously as a government. Delighted that we've committed to reduce gambling harm. and that some of those steps we've taken are good, that this further step of taxing the more harmful forms of gambling is going to really push us towards a position where the gambling operators, who are incentivised by profit, their businesses of course, we can change those incentives so these very addictive, very harmful forms of gambling become less appealing versus horse racing, bingo halls, these other more traditional forms of gambling that also generate some social benefits in communities, generate more jobs, and frankly pay a lot more tax in the UK. Some of the online gambling operators, they move their operations around. A lot of the gaming aspects of those operations are based in Gibraltar, they're based in the Isle of Man, they're based in offshore tax havens, they're not paying corporation tax in the same way. I think there's 85,000 jobs supported in the horse racing industry. It's about 10,000 in online gaming, so it's a much smaller number. And as we see, a lot of the money that people are spending is being taken out of communities rather than being spent in the local area, often deprived communities and military guys. The letter that we coordinated was 100 Labour MPs asking the Chancellor to consider the proposals from Gordon Brown and the IPPR to raise around £3 billion on the most harmful forms of gambling, on online gambling, online slots and casinos, and in particular adult gaming centres, protecting bingo halls and protecting horse racing. In fact, investing a little bit more in horse racing, I think some of the proposals talked about, to improve animal welfare. This was extremely popular amongst MPs because they can see the damage in their communities, they can see the rise of AGCs on their high streets in deprived areas, they can see the number of people coming into their surgeries who have family members that have got gambling problems that are leading to all sorts of other criminal activities and family breakups. But also, Labour MPs care deeply about reducing poverty. We care deeply about doing that in the most efficient way possible, which is through the two-child benefit cap. And they look around and they also they listen to what their constituents are complaining about. My constituents often talk to me about the amount of gambling adverts they're seeing, the huge profits that gambling companies are making, and they would like to see a fairer tax system that addresses some of the harms they're seeing in their community. So it was quite an easy argument to make amongst Labour MPs. Raise taxes on offshore, mostly based online and AGC companies in order to raise money to help reduce child poverty, which we did so well under the last Labour government, but has stopped and maybe reversed in some areas over the last 14 years. So sent that to the Chancellor last week, and I understand, because they're doing a consultation, it's something they're seriously considering, and we would like to continue to push for these very positive proposals during conference and over the next few weeks.
Thank you. Baroness Twycross, I can see that you have been scribbling notes in response to that. So I'll give you the opportunity to respond, but I also in particular wanted to ask you to comment on sort of the balance between reforming gambling taxation and tackling harm, and those two aims together, and how the government is moving forward on that.
So I think there is a balance. I think that the tackling gambling harm needs to be done in a thoughtful way. I think I'm really proud, and I know a lot of people in this room have campaigned a long time to get the statutory levy. I'm hopeful that having the funding for research, prevention and treatment on a statutory basis will help move things forward. I do think it's important that we get the balance right. And you're right, I was scribbling things down, and it's something I've been thinking about since I was told about the letter. Look, I mean, I think all of us can agree that child poverty is a dreadful thing. It is a scourge of this country, and it's absolutely disgraceful that since we were last in government, when we addressed the issue of child poverty, it has risen to the levels we're seeing today. The government has a commission looking into this, which will report in due course. And separate to that, as mentioned, there's also the consultation that the Treasury is undertaking on potential equalisation of gambling taxes. Now, I think these aren't necessarily issues that we shouldn't necessarily take these two issues together and put them in the same pot. we have to look at the two things as two different issues. So the first question is, should we lift the two-child limit? And that's an issue that the government will come back on in due course, potentially in the near future. And should we look at whether we think the taxes on betting and gambling are appropriate? Those are two perfectly reasonable things for the government to look at. I'm not convinced we should be putting them in the same pot where you get a very easy answer to what is actually a very complex issue. I think I know many of you in the room will disagree with the sector when they talk about the black market and the risk of the black and grey market. But actually, these are real risks that we have to take things in the round. We have to look at what the implications are of raising taxes and what level of taxes is a safe level to raise them to, where you won't push consumers into the black market. And that's the type of issue. And I'm very glad I'm not a Treasury Minister. I'm not an accountant. I'm not really cut out to be a Treasury Minister. But they've got to work through all the implications, including on jobs, and appreciate that there's a relatively low number of jobs in online betting companies, but they're concentrated in regional areas. The impact on the community of Stoke, for example, where Bet365 is based, we also have to take into account what the impact on a community like that would be if you drove those jobs out through higher taxation. So these are all the types of things. So I think rather than putting everything into the same pot and oversimplifying it, and I spoke on a panel about populism yesterday and green populism, and I spoke out very clearly on having evidence-based policy but value-based decisions. And I am very clear, as somebody who's campaigned for most of my political life on child poverty, that we do need to address child poverty. We do need to look at who pays what taxes and whether those are fair, but they should be taken as two separate issues, not an easy solution to what we can all agree is a social scourge in this country.
Thank you. That's the money side of things. On the community harms-based side of things, I know that that's something that I think everyone on this panel has worked on and done research on. Henry, could you tell us a bit about the regulation side of it and what we're dealing with in terms of community high streets and the harm element versus this would raise a lot of money?
Sure, yeah. So clearly there are. We know about what the gambling harms are. At least 750,000 people with, moderate to risk of gambling problems. Kind of estimated that for every person, there's at least 6 people who will be impacted by that. This is, it is a major issue. But I actually think that colleagues on the other side have probably done more work on the community side of this, to be honest. No, these are my notes from when I came in, sorry.
Yeah, we see with adult gaming centres, we're just doing the research at the moment with Brain Council, but we know that councils have been unable to say no. We know that when you survey local people, what are the things that they like to see on their high street, what are the things they don't like to see on the high street. One of the things that they really don't like to see is AGCs. They see it as a sign that their communities are sort of, it's the pound shops people are sort of okay with. I mean, they use the pound shops, they can see that. And then you get fast food shops, that's the sort of what's happening in those areas. And then you get AGCs, and it's that sudden rise of AGCs. And we know from our research so far, both from the community and also from other businesses in the area, that the other businesses don't like that proliferation of AGCs. They feel that means that people aren't going to come to their part of the town, that it's sort of changing the perception of their part of the town. So we're still doing the research on that, but we know that that already from the research that the densification of AGCs is deeply unpopular in local communities. And we also know that councils have essentially stopped appealing because of the right that they have, the aim to permit, is being forcefully appealed by the gambling companies themselves, and they keep losing those cases. And if you're a council, you're already cash-strapped. The idea that you're going to go to court and try and fight against a big gambling company is they're losing those cases. I just want to come back on the point the Minister made about Stoke. And I can understand that there'll be people in Stoke where Bet365 is. But we're talking about £2 billion. And unless they're all driving Ferraris in Stoke, that is a lot of money, and there isn't that many jobs in Stoke based on Bet365. And what we are talking about is just raising online gambling tax to the levels in other countries, where, in many cases, these same gambling companies are paying more tax in those other countries. So, and the same goes with AGCs. We know that some of the owners of AGCs in this country are actually foreign companies that aren't able to have those same shops, those same AGCs in their own countries because other countries have regulated them more strictly. So what we're asking is not something that's going to destroy the gambling industry, it's just to bring us into line with what the best other countries are doing, which is what we should aspire to be.
And I think there's to go back to online gambling and to talk about deprived communities, about 80% of the profits from gambling operators come from, there's lots of different studies on it, but roughly 10% of people that gamble quite extensively. Problem gamblers more often in this group than otherwise. And all of the money that is being spent on online gambling is money that could be spent on high streets, in communities, to go to the pub, to go to restaurants, cafes, and other things. So we're in places like Stoke, in places like everywhere around the country, there's actually money being extracted from places which are more deprived than others to go to these offshore organisations. And I speak to people in Halesowen, and they tell me about their concerns on the high street, and it's vape shops, it's barbers. So there's a concern there's too many Turkish barbers, although the Turkish barbers in Halesowen are quite good, and of course AGCs. And I will come back briefly to the public's view on this stuff. And there was some polling done on the proposals to raise taxes in order to cut the two-child benefit cap. Now, it's a popular policy. 64% of people supported it in quite a large sample. I think 14% opposed it. I would like to see the Labour government doing more popular things at the moment. I think that's broadly a good argument to make. And populism, if it can achieve good results, is something that we should be celebrating and improving our communication skills around. But taxation is popular, removing adult gaming centres from the high street is popular, and supporting horse racing and bingo halls is popular. So it's quite a nice package that has been developed by SMF and IPPR that I think the government could support and happens to raise a lot of money when we're in a very difficult financial situation.
I think I'm going to hand it over to audience questions, which we'll take in threes, and then people on the panel can answer the ones that they would most like. So if we start over there in that corner, do we have a microphone? Would you like to take one of these microphones?
I can just talk about this.
Sure.
I'm from IPPG. One of the, as Baroness acknowledged, one of the risks of changing the tax is that what the betting industry says will happen does. That odds worsen, jackpots diminish, and that people end up seeking out better returns offshore in the black market. When you carried out your assessment, can you just give me some idea of what analysis you did on this and to what degree you think those things are true? Because I suppose if the OBR was scoring this policy, how certain would it think the £3 billion is? Is it a pot of money waiting to be taken? Or is it actually highly uncertain that you get it?
Okay, I will let people do their calculations while we take two other questions. There was one over here.
I'm a member of the public, just seeing where I'm living.
Lovely T-shirt.
Thank you. Sad, I wish I wasn't wearing the T-shirt because we lost my 19-year-old nephew to online gambling suicide. He was betting with Bet365. I've seen all his betting records and I've seen all the communications from Bet365.
Thank you very much for that. I think that's for the Minister and the MP on the panel. And there was one more at the back there, and then we'll come round to another round.
Hi, I'm Veronica Hawking from 38 Degrees. We're a campaigning organisation. We've done a lot of very proud campaigning with Gambling with Lives over the years, and we're working with Gordon Brown and others at the moment on the proposal around two-child benefit. Alex, thank you for mentioning the polling. That's polling that we commissioned a few weeks ago, which is 64% of the public backing the proposal. Excuse me. But I was just looking at the numbers a bit more, and I just wanted to share that amongst voters who voted Labour last time but have now moved away in terms of where their support is at the moment, 80% of those people support this measure. So I just wanted to pull out some of those figures just to really underline kind of how popular it is, particularly as the government are thinking about those voters that they're going to want to make sure that they win back.
Thank you. Henry, would you like to score your calculations, OBR style?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, so black market's obviously a major kind of consideration in this. As you say, it's not simple. So first of all, I just want to say, obviously, sort of the threat of black markets has been used quite a lot in gambling discourse over time and gambling reform. You know, when 2014 point of consumption taxes were introduced in gambling, you know, there was a lot of talk of basically that this was going to cause huge black markets. They did not materialise. The state of knowledge on black markets in the UK is often been funded by the gambling industry, so kind of like the evidence base is just pretty poor. And the other thing to say as well is that like we obviously have a choice to a degree as to the extent to which we enforce, block out black markets. You know, you can deal with payment providers, you can deal with internet service providers. You know, the Gambling Commission has the ability to shut these down, and they do. And the other thing to say as well is, so the Gambling Commission currently spends £30 million roughly on enforcement in total. So supposing that they just spent 1% of the additional revenue that is being raised here, that would double the capacity of the Gambling Commission. So although of course we should be serious when we're thinking about black markets and the impact that might have, and it could have revenue implications, that could be possible. We shouldn't just take the current situation as given. You can beef up enforcement capacity, and we shouldn't just sort of put our hands up and go, oh well, we won't be able to stop that, so that means we should not tax. So that's what I would say in terms of black markets. Yeah.
I'm just interested in Theo's perspective because we've got two people on the panel whose think tanks both did really in-depth, detailed research into this and came up with slightly different figures. So I wonder if you could score
So our 2 billion is part of their 3 billion in effect. So they take our 2 billion and there's additional. And in terms of the, I absolutely agree. I think Henry said about piracy. I worked at Google for 9 years, TikTok for 5 years. I spent a lot of time looking at where online harm comes from and how you can tackle it. And the example that the gambling industry have chosen to illustrate the risk of the rise of black markets is Netherlands. And because there was a tax introduced there. But there's also a whole range of other things introduced at the same time, which we are not proposing, and that's partly what caused the behaviour change there. But it's also that Netherlands is known, at least within the tech industry, as one of the most permissive cultures when it comes to online content in the world. They are the largest host, for example, of online child abuse in the world, not just in Europe. And so picking out the Netherlands as an example of how harm is going to be caused is picking the very worst possible extreme and then pretending that that's the model. Whereas, because in the Netherlands you have to go through a court process, in the UK we don't do that. In fact, we've just had the Online Safety Act, and now we're clamping down on porn sites that don't have age verification. We have measures in this country that don't need to go through a court process that will enable us to tackle illegal gambling. So we are actually much more powerful, much better at tackling that sort of online harm than the betting companies are pretending by pulling out that example. And as Henry said, they're the ones who funded most of the research in this area, and so they're sort of presenting a version of events that's to their advantage. And the other thing I would say is other countries tax at the level that we're proposing, including the US. So it can be done. Yeah.
Thank you. Would either of you like to go back on the question of advertising and the culture surrounding it and the impact there?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a really interesting study that comes out every year that talks about the number of gambling adverts that happen on Premier League opening weekend. I don't think it's come out this year. I'm waiting for that analysis to happen. But last year it was 29,000 different advertising messages just in that one weekend. Everybody watches football. Families watch football. Kids watch football. Young people watch football. And gambling operators, they take advantage of this. Now, there are rules in amongst the ASA about using young people or using celebrities that might be particularly appealing to children in your advertising. And some companies do follow those rules, but they are widely ignored on social media, and they're widely ignored online. And we are seeing lots of evidence of influencers, young football stars, and others being used by gambling operators to promote their operations. Many of these gambling operators are not regulated in the UK. And it links back to the advertising. Links back to the black market. In fact, 4 of the front shirt sponsors of Premier League football teams are unregulated or gambling companies that are not permitted to operate inside the UK. So there is a huge gap between what I think we should be doing on advertising and what is happening at the moment. And if we want to tackle the black market, one easy way is to ban companies that are not permitted to operate in the UK from advertising in the UK. And there are certain other things we could do as well. There's some really interesting work done by the University of Bristol on this, where they're speaking to the ASA on individual gambling adverts that they deem to have breached the rules. But I don't think the ASA has significant enough powers to tackle the kind of abuse that is really going after those young people at the moment.
I just want to say to the woman who described herself as a member of the public, I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, how sorry I am to hear about your family's loss. I think I've heard too many stories like yours. I think advertising, the marketing, and particularly the impact on young people, and we know from research that young adults, young men in particular, sort of are particularly susceptible, which is why we have actually sort of dealt with that age group slightly different in terms of the online slots. I had a really interesting conversation with YGAM a couple of weeks ago in terms of the research they've done and the work they're doing in terms of education. And I think, yes, we can and we should tackle advertising. It is one of the challenges I've set the sector. The Gambling Commission is doing more on direct marketing. They have addressed and raised the issue of front of shirt sponsorship by companies that are no longer licensed in the UK, although when they took out the sponsorship deals they were. And I've also been clear to the sector that if we don't see progress in terms of the proliferation of advertising, we will look at how we can take more action from a government perspective. I think, though, and I can't remember who it was or mentioned about sort of research. I think it was the research on the black market and the fact that some of this has been sponsored or sort of paid for by the sector. One of the most frustrating things for me as a minister over the past year has been that a lot of the research that's been presented to me has been paid by people who, by companies or organisations that, I don't want to say it as one side or another, because I think, but sometimes it feels like that within sort of the stakeholders I deal with. And this is why the statutory levy is so important, because for the first time we'll have statutory funding going into the research, which hopefully will mean that we can come up with research that everybody, whatever part of the, whether you're a campaigner, whether you're a company working in this area, that for the first time we'll actually have statutory funding sort of providing the research base that when I have meetings with people working in this sphere, campaigning in this area, or with the companies, at the moment it's always been slightly disputed by what I sort of reluctantly call the other side.
I just wondered if you wanted to come back on the issue both of research and also of polling, given that you said this hits several popular policy areas and how those link together.
Yeah, absolutely. On the research, I completely agree with the Minister. I had a really useful meeting with the Public Health Minister about the work that OHID, the new department of the NHS, is doing on research. And they're from the same view, I think, which is there is so much of this information that is presented as fact that has been funded by the gambling industry and by anti-gambling campaigners, that it'd be great to have an independent body that is really focused on public health outcomes, that is doing the research on this, and I hope that can be done quickly so we can move and act on it. On the polling, 38 Degrees did a brilliant job pulling that together. I mean, governing is about choices and setting a direction on which way you want the country to go. I think if you speak to people in the streets, they think we're going in the wrong direction on gambling. We're permitting too much. The rise of these very addictive online gambling and the very addictive adult gaming centres on our high streets are something that the public on the whole doesn't like the look of. They think that we should be doing more about it, and the evidence from the polls clearly shows that. Now, we have a manifesto commitment to reduce harm. I'm delighted that we're doing some good work on that, but there is a good public appetite for us to go further, and we perform well as a government when we respond to what the public is asking us to do.
More questions? Okay, loads. Okay, we'll get one there, and one there.
Thank you. My question, so I'm from Gordon Moody. We treat people in a residential setting for gambling harm. My question in particular is around the statutory levy. So we're currently facing a situation where our services will start to be wound up from April onwards. Our current commissioning contract has now been terminated. I just wondered if there was any security or any information you could provide in terms of the future with the statutory levy because of the uncertainty it's creating across the sector.
Thank you. And then there were two in the front row.
Thank you. My name's Martin Jones. I'm a bereaved parent. I've got 16 years' experience of gambling harm and gambling suicide. In those 16 years, I've worked with the Gambling Commission, Gambling with Lives, Gamble Aware, probably 15 or 20 of the top researchers in the UK. Along with Charles, I've sat through 5 gambling suicide inquests, so we might know a thing or two. I work with 2 charities, GamFam and GamLearn, each of whom have hundreds of members, and in aggregate they have thousands of years of lived experience of harm. So we were encouraged last year when we heard you say, I want to speak to everybody. We were hugely disappointed last week when we said, we haven't got time to talk to you. I'd invite you to reconsider that. In terms of the topic on the table, 5 years ago, the Public Accounts Committee published a scathing report flagging that both the Gambling Commission and DCMS had not got a grip on harm. They've got no strategic objectives, they've got no measures of success, and they've got no metrics. I'm pretty sure that's pretty much the case today. I can help you a little bit with that. The most conservative estimate of harm is the Adult Psychiatric Morbidity Survey, which quotes a figure of 0.4% of the adult population that's suffering from gambling harm. In those stats, it doesn't sound a lot, but in real numbers, that means something like 380,000 people are severely harmed by gambling and living in misery. And beyond that, tens of thousands are severely harmed by gambling, living in misery with suicidal thoughts. And beyond that, thousands are severely harmed by gambling, living in misery with suicidal thoughts and attempting suicide. And beyond that, many take their own lives. The correct policy approach to that scale of problem, let alone what it will look like if you take the gambling survey of Great Britain numbers, or the Northern Ireland number of 3.1%, or the Liverpool Merseyside number of 3%. You could make it an order of magnitude bigger, but we need to stop tinkering at the edges. We need to remove the aim to permit, which will free up the high streets with local authorities to control that, avoid the conflict of interest with the Gambling Commission trying to look both ways at once. We need to give the Gambling Commission the prime objective to prevent harm, not to grow the industry. And we need to give industry a statutory duty of care to prevent harm. Now, the normal response to that is we need to find a balance between preventing harm and freedom of people to place a bet. Those measures are not attacking the freedom of people to place a bet. They're attacking the freedom of the industry to continue to abuse the 5% of customers that make 80% of their profits. So if you want a popular manifesto pledge for the next general election, those three things would go a long way to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And the lady next to you, I think. Oh, we'll take both.
Okay, thank you. I'm Councillor Millie Patel, Deputy Leader at Brent Council, and Theo said that we've been working with the Social Market Foundation on our campaign in Brent. So our issue is that local people want to say no to, these adult gaming centres, land-based gambling that they're seeing, sort of clustering on their high streets. So whilst we welcome MHLCG's sort of announcement that we get a more say of what's going to be on our high street, without, the previous sort of person said it's about aim to permit, we need to know where that is so that as local authorities we can have that power to say no, because at the moment we have the power to say that you can't have a fish and chip shop next to a school, but I can't on an adult gaming centre which will have a digital screen of advertising constantly while a school child is waiting at a bus stop right by their school. So I think that we need to look at that, and we need to know what the detail is around aim to permit, please.
Thank you. I'm just a member of the public, so I'm sorry if they're slightly uninformed points, but I think the first one was the point the Minister made about people losing jobs in Stoke. To me, gambling is similar in terms of the kind of harm that smoking would be, and so I can't imagine that argument being deployed in relation to, we can't tax smoking more because some people might lose jobs. So that's the first point. And the second point, it's a question. You talk about quite a lot of the gambling companies offshoring to avoid paying tax. Is that something that can be addressed in any way in terms of, licensing, only permitting, ultimate or companies of ultimate owners who have to pay tax in the UK to actually be allowed to offer gambling services here? Sorry, they're probably completely numpty points, but.
Thank you. Lots to get through there. Where would you like to start? I'm going to turn to Alex.
Lots for the Minister now.
Thank you.
I think as chair you get your own mic. There you go. I'll start with the woman who described herself as just a member of the public. Never describe yourself as just. That's what Mum always says when I ring her up and say, it's just Fiona. So never just say you're just a member of the public. I think what I meant by the comment on Stoke is that there are implications for any decision that is made on taxation, and these are rightly things that the Treasury will be looking at when they arrive at their decision. I think it has to be a balance, and my concern is that we are looking for a solution for something that all of us want to solve, without sort of looking at the wider implications. I have read the reports and I appreciate that they do go into this in some detail, but I think all these things have to be taken in the round and considered as a whole. In terms of the licensing point, I've actually sort of asked officials to talk to DSIT, because I think one of the issues is around VPNs, which isn't something I've ever used. Obviously, most of us probably in the room haven't used them, but which young people use quite routinely. So if we are, that's quite a broad sweeping statement, which is a dangerous statement for anybody to make from a platform. But I think, but again, we actually need to look at what are the implications, what more can we do in that online safety world to make sure that we don't push people to places that they shouldn't be by thinking we're solving one solution. Are we creating another? In terms of the question from around Gordon Moody, if you've got specific questions, I think officials in DCMS are very happy to talk through it. We are clear that money should start flowing within the new levy system from next month, which is only a couple of days away now. But if you're experiencing particular issues, and I know some organisations have flagged that in conversations I've had with them, then let me know and I'll make sure that through my private office you can talk to the right officials who haven't done so. On Martin's point, I'd like to say I do understand that how upset and angry and devastating suicide makes people. I was hoping not to have to push back on the meeting point, but I was strongly advised by my officials not to meet somebody who'd been very aggressive on social media. So I appreciate you probably didn't feel that you were, but when somebody writes something like, you can run but you can't hide, and your officials then say, please don't meet this person, and I say, is there not a way we can meet this person? And they say, we're strongly advising you not to, then I have to take that seriously. And I appreciate that's probably not what you meant, and I know that people say things on social media they don't meet, but I'm really sorry that's where we are. But I do appreciate that you did make efforts to get in touch. Yeah, well, that's probably not appropriate either, but we'll just leave that as it is. So I think we can say things on social media we don't actually mean people to take seriously, and I'll leave it at that. So I think that on Brent Council, I had a really good visit to Brent, as you'll be aware, with the leader of the council and with Dawn Butler. I'm delighted that following that and following conversations I had with Alex Norris in his previous role over the summer, we had the announcement next week. I'm also not going to be the minister that goes into prospective details and what that might include, but I thought that Steve Reed was quite clear that he actually wants communities to be able to have a really strong say in what their local area is. Thank you.
Just on the issue around VPNs and people, you sort of end up in whack-a-mole that you take these sites down and people go to different ones. The difference with gambling is you have to make a payment, and so it's the payment system. You just follow the money, and there aren't that many payment systems. So and this has been done before in where there was paid piracy, and you could just go after that, or where you've got fraudulent fake sites pretending to be something else. If you just go after the money bit, that's the bit that's most trackable. So you just make sure that Visa, MasterCard, Amex, PayPal are not able to provide services from the UK to that payment provider, and that doesn't require VPNs or anything like that. You can just see someone's got to pay from one account to another. So you can cut off access, and given that gambling depends on money, you just cut off the money rather than trying to chase the websites.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more round of questions, if we could keep them fairly brief. There were loads of hands before. There we go. 1, 2, 3, done.
Hello, I'm just a Labour Party member. I'm a proud Labour Party member, sometimes. I think it's really important to differentiate, like some of the panel members have, on the difference between like the bingo halls and the adult gaming centres, because usually in politics we talk about harm versus the benefits, where I feel like there's no benefits at all to these. They disrupt lives and communities. So you'd have to focus like more on the free will argument. Do people have the right to do that? And look at the right of family members and friends and communities, and whether that's also should be considered. So yeah, the harms be benefits of that?
I've got no vested interest in this whatsoever, but I'm just quite interested. Both your panelists on my left, you were both at pains to say about how you're going to protect the horse racing industry. Why do you think the horse racing industry so violently disagrees with you?
And there was one more.
I'm a Labour Party member. I also happen to work for Entain, which is a top 20 taxpayer and employs 14,000 people in the UK. A lot of whom are in retail. We very much over-index in retail with female employees, and a lot of them work their hours around childcare. So I just wanted to make that point as something to bear in mind when you talk about these jobs don't count or we don't employ anyone. I'd like to just ask you, there's a lot of talk about who funds research. Could you just tell us who funded this research from the two think tanks? And take your point on clamping down on the black market, and also you made a point about the Netherlands making changes at the same time. We have actually had a lot of change in regulation. Gambling Act's been in for 20 years, if you think about online platforms regulation that's only just come in. And the beauty of it is the flexibility of the Act. You don't need new legislation to make significant changes, and that's happened in the last few years around financial vulnerability checks, financial risk checks, affordability checks. There's been a lot of regulation. Wouldn't you be better off seeing this regulation bed in before you look to increase taxes? I'd also like to make a point about your 50% tax rate. A lot of the examples you're referring to in the US, there was no corporation tax. So our effective tax rate is 65%. We are highly taxed. That's why we're a top 20 taxpayer. We're only about a top 80 company in the UK. So just and the final point on black market, you referenced payment systems. A lot of these black market operators based in Eastern Europe have their own payment systems. And if you increase this tax, you can see a lot of flights to the black market. Latest research was about 9%. And actually that was by an anti-gambling campaigner, not a pro-gambling campaigner. And once that gets a foothold, it's very difficult to get back. So it's not that easy. And that's why it's still an issue. You should think very carefully before making these changes.
As we're nearing the end, I wonder if you want to take some of those questions and also one final thought to leave everyone with.
Sure. Yeah. I'd love to hear more about this East European payment system. I find it implausible that millions of people in the UK are suddenly going to start flooding to that. The minister sort of said you've got one side and the other, obviously sort of you represent the side that's funded by the industry, that's making huge profits. This research we've done on AGCs is funded by Brent Council. The submission we made to the Treasury is not funded by anyone. It's worse than you think. We're doing this because we believe in it, and we think most people support it. That's the difficult thing for your side of the argument. We also have had work that's been sponsored by Derek Webb, who I know is a bête noire for the gambling industry because he's one of the people funding anti-gambling research. I think it was somewhere between £10,000 and £20,000, which is less than we normally would get for a report. I think that was last year, but we publish it all on our website. We don't have any secrets about that. We're very happy to be open, and I'm sure the IPPR will be the same in terms of their public disclosure. The amount of money funding anti-gambling research is in no way comparable with the amount of money funding the gambling lobby over the last few years. So I don't think it's an equivalent side. And I'm happy to come back on more of that. But we think that online gambling, as you said, is the most harmful form of gambling. And to your question on horse racing, it's true that some people in the horse racing industry don't like what we're doing, and I think part of that is the broader gambling industry saying that they will take punitive action on the horse racing industry if this goes ahead. We don't think that's necessary. The way that we've designed the policy is to protect horse racing and to exempt smaller operators, and there are people in the horse racing industry, and I know because they reach out to me, who actually do support what we're doing. So I don't accept your characterisation of it as completely one-sided. But it is a change for horse racing because for so long gambling and horse racing have been inseparable, and what we're trying to do is say that actually you can discriminate between the most harmful, least employing form of gambling and those that do employ more people and where people it's more sociable activity. So, yeah, we can make that distinction, I think.
Sorry, it's 50 to 60,000
Derek Webb's, when was that, last year? Or was that total? Total over... Total, so, yeah, that's great. So it's public, so you're asking a question. I don't know what yeah, how much have you spent? You're going to tell us? What's the industry spent? How much are you paid? Well, no, how much, I've been very public about what we spent. You brought this to a public meeting. Go and ask Michael Duggar how much is he spending. And the next meeting, bring it.
Thank you, Theo. So just to address the horse racing question, they went on strike, I think, a couple of weeks ago, but that was not around the proposals of the SMF and IPPR. That was in response to the consultation on harmonisation, which would have increased the tax that horse racing was paying, so it would be in line with online operators, which is the opposite of what we're proposing. And we've had support from the National Trainers Federation. I've spoken to the British Horse Racing Authority. Broadly, there are members of the horse racing industry that really like these proposals. Not everyone, as Theo says, but there are people that do like this approach of differentiation for all those good reasons we've talked about. A couple of questions and concerns about, are we going in the right direction? Should adult gaming centres exist even? What is the industry trade-offs? I'll just make a big plug for the all-party parliamentary group for gambling reform. There's lots of MPs that are interested in this. We've launched an inquiry into the gambling sector as a whole and what we think needs to be changed around regulation generally. So the last time we had primary legislation on gambling was in 2005. The world has changed enormously in that time, not least with the rise of online gambling and the rise of adult gaming centres, the rise of the smartphone. People can now do all this stuff in their bedroom in the middle of the night, shortly after being paid. Really welcome the changes that the Minister has been taking forward in recent months. We're going to be looking at what other changes need to be made, and we'll be doing that over the next 4 or 5 months. And please do come down and contribute, including the gambling industry, to that inquiry, because we want to get as much evidence as we can from as many different sources, and so we can make some sensible proposals.
If we go to Henry, and then the Minister can have the last word.
Yep, sure. So, firstly, just on our funding. So, we first dabbled in this a year ago on our health commission, which was funded by health companies and the like. And that's when we started talking about health creating levies and using taxes to potentially fund health interventions. The most recent work that we've done was also unfunded on our end, so just to be clear on that, because we thought it was strategic and important to do the work at this time. I suppose just in terms of closing thoughts from me, I suppose like obviously there are lots of potential ways that you can raise taxes here. But the important thing is that we do, and the argument that gambling is undertaxed, it just so clearly is. We talk about all the harm that's being caused. Packet cigarettes, 3/4 of the price of cigarettes is excise duty. Why is there no excise duty in gambling levies? Why is there no VAT being paid? The point that was raised earlier about, the offshoring of profits, etc., that's very complicated to resolve and is obviously applicable across lots of industries, not just gambling companies. But, why are we not getting a grip on that? They're sort of getting away with a lot. And so, that kind of core argument that, we should do more on this and beyond kind of just unifying the tax rates, I think is clear for everyone to see. And also clear to everyone to see, I think, is that this is a public health issue. I think it sits with the Department for Health as much as it does with Department for Culture, Media and Sport. I think that's been highlighted by a lot of people who are here today who are like, this has affected them in ways that this is just a major public health issue. So let's move it over and start to have those sort of conversations more. I think that's my thought. Thanks.
So I'm just going to finish by saying that I very much hope I'm going to be able to come back as Gambling Minister next year. I was delighted to stay on at DCMS. I know a lot of you have expressed frustration previously that there was quite a steady turnover of gambling ministers during the last year, during the first 6 months of my time as gambling minister. I think pretty much everybody came in and said that I was the 9th person they'd met in 5 years or 10th person they'd met in 6. So I think I'm hoping that we can continue to move things forward through the former government's, the Conservative White Paper, and look at where we need to take action. I think it's been a really good debate this morning. I think sometimes debate is really important in terms of teasing out the issues. So thank you very much for inviting me. I do very much hope I can come back next year as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you all of you for coming, and can we have a big round of applause for our wonderful panel this morning.